Imagine believing in a foundational truth about human nature.
Right.
I want you to just picture a famous scientific narrative that you, your friends, your professors, basically virtually everyone you know just accepts as absolute bedrock reality.
Like an unquestionable fact.
Exactly. You've seen it referenced in movies. You've probably heard it used to explain the absolute darkest corners of human behavior. And you've never once thought to question it because it is just deeply woven into the fabric of our cultural understanding.
It's just part of the furniture.
Yeah. It sits there in your mind, this heavy, unquestionable pillar of how you view the world. Now, imagine waking up one day and being confronted with a really jarring possibility. What if that entire pillar was made of paper?
Wow.
What if the story you accepted as a profound revelation about human cruelty was entirely fabricated?
I mean, that forces a complete recalibration. When we build our worldview on established narratives, we rarely go down into the basement to check the concrete.
No, we never do.
Right. We assume the foundation was poured correctly by the intellectual authorities who came before us. But when someone suggests that the foundation itself might be an illusion, it requires us to dismantle everything we thought we knew about authority, conformity, and, honestly, science itself.
That feeling of recalibration, that sudden intellectual freefall, is exactly what we are jumping into right now. We are looking at a topic that carries an immense amount of cultural weight.
It really does.
The Stanford Prison Experiment. I mean, it functions almost like an urban legend at this point.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it.
It's like Bloody Mary, but for intellectuals. We hear the name, we nod our heads, we accept the sweeping conclusions it supposedly offers about human darkness. But rarely do we actually pop the hood and look at the engine of this story.
Which brings us to the core of what we are examining today. We're looking at a very specific, pointed text that challenges that trust head-on. The text presents us with a driving question, encapsulated in this incredible juxtaposition of concepts, fraudulence and fact.
Fraudulence and fact.
Yes. And it pushes further into a highly specific, ultimate inquiry. Was it a complete fraud?
Not, was it flawed, not when it's slightly misguided. But the Stanford Prison Experiment, was it a complete fraud? We are going to spend our time tearing apart those exact concepts because the implications stretch far beyond a single basement in California in 1971.
And to be clear about our mission today, we aren't just reading a title. We are here to philosophically and historically unpack what these concepts actually mean. We need to look at the unearthing of archival evidence, the specific mechanics of the study, and what it truly signifies for us as a society to turn around and question a completely entrenched experiment.
Because it is deeply entrenched.
It is. We have to ask how a narrative achieves that level of dominance and what happens when that dominance is shattered by its own hidden audio tapes.
Okay, let's unpack this. I really want to start with the sheer power of the phrase itself. Just those 4 words. The Stanford Prison Experiment.
The branding.
The branding. Those words are doing a massive amount of psychological heavy lifting before you even know what the methodology is. Let's break down the inherent contradiction happening right there in the title. First, we have Stanford. When you attach a name like Stanford to a study, how much does that institutional prestige just blind the peer review process?
What's fascinating here is the immediate halo effect that the word Stanford provides. Institutional names carry immense architectural weight in our minds.
They really do.
Especially in the context of the replication crisis in psychology, where we're finding out that many foundational studies can't actually be reproduced. That halo effect is a massive liability.
Because we just trust it blindly.
Exactly. The word Stanford sets a stage of sterility, objectivity, and elite rigor. It implies a level of elite trustworthiness that effectively preempts your skepticism. You are far less likely to question the motives or the methodology when it is draped in the robes of a globally recognized university.
You see ivy-covered brick walls and vast endowments, and your brain automatically files it under credible. You just don't fight it.
You don't.
But then, right next to this word that implies ultimate safety and elite control, we have the word prison. You go from palm trees and peer review to concrete and steel bars.
It is a brilliant, almost jarring juxtaposition. The word prison evokes the exact opposite of an elite university campus. It evokes chaos, punishment, a total loss of personal autonomy, danger, and the absolute rawest aspects of human behavior.
The absolute rawest.
But the reality of how that prison was constructed completely undermines the premise. If we look at the historical context, the researchers didn't just passively observe a prison dynamic organically forming. They brought in a man named Carlo Prescott.
The ex-con from San Quentin.
Yes. Prescott had actually served time in San Quentin. He was brought in as a consultant, but his role was much more foundational than that word implies. He effectively wrote the script for the environment.
He wrote the script.
He designed the parole hearings, the rules, the specific types of degradation the guards would inflict. So the prison wasn't a spontaneous emergence of human darkness. It was a deliberate restaging of San Quentin, designed by a man who had lived through it and inflicted upon college students.
See, that completely changes the texture of the word prison in this context. It wasn't an organic environment. It was a franchised experience.
Franchised experience, yes.
It's like putting a tuxedo on a Wolverine. You have these two diametrically opposed concepts smashed together. Stanford promises that the situation is contained by brilliant minds, but prison promises that the situation is inherently uncontainable. And that tension is resolved by the final word, experiment.
And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the word experiment holds a virtually sacred epistemological status in our society.
Oh, absolutely.
An experiment is supposed to be a sterile crucible. The entire purpose of a controlled experiment is to give you an objective measurement of reality, completely independent of the observer.
We are taught from a very young age that an experiment removes human bias. But in this case, the lead researcher, Philip Zimbardo, didn't just observe the experiment. He appointed himself the prison superintendent.
Which is an absolute violation of the core tenets of objective research. It introduces massive demand characteristics.
Explain that for a second, the demand characteristics.
Demand characteristics occur when participants in a study alter their behavior to fit what they believe the researchers expect of them. When the lead researcher is walking around acting as the superintendent, holding meetings and directing the flow of the prison, he isn't a scientist observing a beaker. He is a chemist jumping into the beaker and stirring the chemicals himself.
It's the ultimate conflict of interest. I mean, how did that survive peer review for 50 years?
Because the narrative was too compelling. It aligned perfectly with the zeitgeist of the early 1970s. We were grappling with the atrocities of the Vietnam War, civil unrest, and a general distrust of authority. The idea that ordinary people could turn into monsters simply by putting on a uniform was a story society was desperate to hear and desperate to believe. The word experiment provided the scientific alibi to accept that story as a hard fact.
Which brings me to you, listening right now. Reflect on your own daily biases. Think about how you consume information. When you hear the phrase, well, a famous experiment showed, do you automatically let your critical defenses drop?
Most people do.
Do you bypass the methodology entirely just because the box says experiment?
This raises an important question about how we surrender our intellectual agency. We rely on heuristics, mental shortcuts, to navigate a world of information overload. The word experiment is a VIP pass past the bouncers of our critical thinking.
A VIP pass, I love that.
But the text we are examining shatters that VIP pass by introducing the dichotomy of fraudulence and fact.
Here's where it gets really interesting. Let's look at the subtitle of our source. Fraudulence and fact. It doesn't ask is it real or fake. It uses heavy substantive nouns. Let's tackle fact first, but let's elevate this beyond just a dictionary definition. In the realm of psychology, establishing a fact is incredibly difficult, especially now with what we know about the replication crisis.
Establishing a behavioral fact is an immense burden. A fact is a load-bearing wall in the architecture of human knowledge. It must be repeatable. It must survive rigorous attempts to destroy it. But in the social sciences, we often run into the file drawer problem and confirmation bias.
The file drawer problem.
Right. Studies that produce boring, non-provocative results get stuffed in a file drawer and never published. Studies that produce shocking, headline-grabbing results, like college students turning into sadistic guards in a matter of days, get publicized, and enshrined in textbooks.
Even if the foundation's compromised.
Exactly.
And Stanford Prison Experiment has historically been treated exactly like that. A load-bearing wall in our understanding of authority. But the text slams us with the counter-concept. It places fraudulence right next to it. And the anatomy of fraudulence is entirely different from a methodological error.
A methodological error is a failure to account for a variable or a mistake in statistical analysis. Fraudulence involves intentionality.
Intentionality, that's the key word.
Think of scientific fraudulence, like a counterfeit $100 bill. A counterfeit bill only has power if it perfectly mimics the truth. It might look flawless, feel perfect to the touch, and because it looks perfect, it gets passed into the economy. It acts as a fact in the economy.
Right, you can buy a coffee with it.
It buys real goods, pays real wages, and influences the real world until someone with a trained eye holds it up to the light.
Let's hold this specific experiment up to the light. How does that counterfeit analogy apply to the actual events in that basement?
We could look directly at the archival discoveries made by French academic Thibault Letexier. When Letexier went into the Stanford archives and listened to the unedited audio tapes from the study, he didn't just find methodological errors. He found the counterfeit watermark. He found audio of the researchers explicitly coaching the guards.
The smoking gun.
Precisely. There's a specific recording of David Jaffe, the research assistant, acting as the warden, pulling a guard aside. The guard is being too lenient, too normal. Jaffe explicitly tells him that he needs to be tougher, more active, because the study needs it to succeed.
He tells him the study needs it to succeed.
Yes. The guard pushes back, saying he isn't naturally like that. And Jaffe essentially tells him to try harder. He gives him stage directions.
So the famous cruelty of the guards wasn't a natural psychological descent into darkness. It was a performance requested by management.
It was a job requirement.
That brings us to Dave Eshelman, the famous John Wayne guard. He was the poster child for the experiment's conclusions, the guy who became incredibly sadistic, wore the sunglasses, and spoke with a southern drawl.
Eshelman's case is the perfect embodiment of this fraudulence. Eshelman was an acting student. He explicitly modeled his persona and his accent on Strother Martin, the sadistic warden from the movie Cool Hand Luke.
Cool Hand Luke. He was literally doing an impression.
He later admitted that he viewed the entire thing as an acting exercise. He wanted to give the researchers something compelling to work with. He assumed they wanted a dramatic outcome, so he provided one.
He looked the part, he acted the part, but it was a conscious performance. So what does this all mean for the subtitle, Fraudulence and Fact? Because it's not fraudulence or fact. The A&D is doing tremendous work here.
The A&D represents the gray area, which is far more insidious than a pure lie.
Outside.
If a study is purely fabricated out of thin air, it's relatively easy to dismiss once exposed. But the Stanford Prison Experiment did happen in a physical basement. College students were physically arrested by real police officers as part of the setup. Distress did occur. Those are the facts. But they are inextricably laced with the fraudulence of coaching, acting, and demands characteristics. The factual elements act as a shield for the fraudulent elements. The presence of the fact makes the fraudulence harder to untangle.
It's like putting a drop of poison in a well of fresh water.
Yeah.
You can't extract the poison once it's in there, but defenders of the study can point to the water and say, look, it's wet, it's real.
That's a great analogy.
If someone attacks the experiment, they just point to the fact that a prisoner actually had a breakdown. But they ignore the fraudulence of the environment that forced the breakdown. It paralyzes our critical thinking, which sets up the ultimate question posed by our source. The Stanford Prison Experiment. Was it a complete fraud?
And that word, complete, is the fulcrum upon which this entire discussion balances. Asking if something is a complete fraud is a massive escalation.
What are the implications of the word complete here? Because we've established it was deeply flawed and heavily manipulated, but is it a complete fraud?
If something is a complete fraud, it means there is zero redeeming scientific value in its core premise or its execution. It shifts the conversation from a lack of competence to a presence of theatrical engineering. It implies that the entire endeavor was not a scientific pursuit that went wrong, but a performance designed from the ground up to validate a pre-existing belief.
It's the difference between a documentary filmmaker accidentally getting a line wrong versus a director hiring actors, writing a script based on an ex-con's life, dressing them up, directing their behavior off camera, and then releasing the film as unscripted, raw reality. That is a staging of reality.
Yes. If an experiment is a complete fraud, the outcomes were not discovered. They were manufactured. Zimbardo's explicit instructions to the guards before the study even began, telling them they couldn't physically abuse the prisoners, but could create boredom, a sense of frustration, and fear that is not establishing a baseline for an experiment. That is writing a creative brief for a psychological thriller.
Let's sit with the stakes of that what-if scenario. If this was a stage play disguised as a crucible of truth, what does that say about the systems that accepted it as fact for so long? Textbooks still print this study. It is still taught to thousands of freshmen every year.
This is where the foundation truly shakes. If a complete fraud can successfully masquerade as a foundational scientific fact for over half a century, it is a profound indictment of the academic publishing industry. reveals how vulnerable the scientific community is to confirmation bias.
They just saw what they wanted to see.
Exactly. When a study's conclusion perfectly aligns with a cynical worldview that the intellectual elite already holds, that institutions are inherently corrupting and people are inherently malleable, they stop checking the math. They stop asking for the audio tapes.
It's the domino effect. If the first domino is a theatrical performance, every sociological policy, every workplace training module, every historical analysis built on top of it is compromised. If the universities and the journals failed to detect a fraud of this magnitude, what else have they missed?
This is why asking this specific question is a matter of intellectual survival. We live in an era of unprecedented information density. We are bombarded with data points and expert opinions constantly. If we simply accept the label on the box, if we see the word experiment and instantly swallow the contents, we are incredibly vulnerable to manipulation.
We become passive receptacles for whatever narrative is dressed up in a lab coat. Questioning the validity of these monuments of modern knowledge forces us to look past the impressive labels. We have to ask, was there coaching? Who wrote the rules? Were the participants acting? We have to demand actual proof, not just a compelling story.
It requires us to become active participants in our own understanding of reality. By investigating the fraudulence of one massive cultural touchstone, we sharpen the tools we need to dissect every other piece of information we encounter. We learn to spot the counterfeit bills in the economy of knowledge.
So let's synthesize this. We started by looking at a name that feels as permanent as a mountain. We unpack the wild contradiction of the words, the promise of elite safety colliding with a franchise-scripted prison environment, all wrapped in the revered package of an experiment overseen by a superintendent with a massive conflict of interest.
We then explore the deep trench between fact and fraudulence, and how the unearthing of archival audio tapes revealed the A&D in that equation. The factual physical setting provided cover for the fraudulent behavioral coaching.
And finally, we confronted the immense weight of the word complete. We saw how a complete fraud is a manufactured stage play, and we realized that if something this big could be a theatrical production, it puts every system of institutional knowledge on trial.
That is the crucial takeaway for you listening right now. Your ability to look at a universally accepted truth and have the courage to ask, was it a complete fraud, is your absolute best defense against misinformation. Knowledge is a dynamic landscape. It is only truly valuable when it is relentlessly tested against the archives, not blindly accepted because of a prestigious brand name.
The moment you stop questioning the foundation is the moment you risk living in a house built on sand. But before we leave you, consider this. If a famous experiment turns out to be a complete theatrical fraud, yet society has already spent 50 years learning a massive culturally shifting lesson from it, a lesson about the fragility of human goodness, does the lesson itself become a fact, even if the foundation was a lie?